our borders and my support for the military and our vets. I've actually done something about it in my political life, unlike my opponent. But it happens to be the case that none of these things have anything to do with the office we're running for. I am proud of one endorsement. I'm proud of the endorsement I got from Smythe Duvall, the Libertarian candidate for this office, who agreed with me during the course of our campaign on important election reforms that he and I agree on. He has maintained, and I agree with him, that I'm the candidate for fiscal conservatives, for independents and libertarians, because I'm the only one of the two of us left in this race who's committed to these kinds of election reforms that will increase ballot access and election security at the same time. I'm much more proud of the endorsement of someone who's talking about the issues in this office and who knows what he's talking about.
Thank you. That concludes the first portion of this program. So traditionally, this is a part of the debate when candidates ask a question to their opponent. However, since Mr. Raffensperger declined to participate, John Barrow, you may ask a question to your opponent, who is represented by an empty podium.
Well, the last time we were at this debate, I think I beat my opponent up pretty big on the fact that every time he's filed for public office to run, he's filed a sworn statement under oath that he paid his taxes, and every time he lied about it. I beat him up pretty bad about that in the last election. Just yesterday, I beat him up on something else. He staked his entire campaign on two issues. He claims that I oppose voter ID, and he claims that I oppose updating and maintaining clean and accurate voter rolls. Well, I beat him up yesterday pretty bad on the Shelley Winter show about the Real ID Act business, but today I want to address one of the claims he's made. He claims that I'm opposed to maintaining our voting rolls. He's even gone so far as to say that I have stated that I will refuse to maintain and update our voting rolls. The only evidence he's ever cited for this, ever, is a news article that came out a while back, and this is what I said in the news article. Of course you have to maintain the voting lists, but death certificates can be used, and change of address notices filed by voters. These are a lot more reliable information. He's taken a difference about how best to do it and turned it into a phony claim that I'm opposed to doing it. It's dishonest as hell, and if you would hear, I'd say it to his face.
Thank you. You now have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
I think I've already given the rebuttal. Move on to your questions. I think it'd be better use of our time.
That concludes the second part of our program. And for those of us just joining us, this is the runoff debate between candidates for Secretary of State. Due to a scheduling conflict, Brad Raffensperger decided not to attend. He is represented by an empty podium. And now we go back to our panel to ask questions of John Barrow until we run out of time. As a point of moderator privilege, I may also ask questions of the candidates. We have very capable journalists here asking questions. And Crystal Edmondson, you get the first one.
Mr. Barrow, you mentioned election security. What needs to happen to improve Georgia's voter technology, whether that be machines or software, in your opinion?
We have to improve in the areas of both voter registration and enrollment and in the actual conduct of our elections. On the preparation side, on the registration front, we need to do a better job of bringing the information that is on file with the Department of Driver's Services. These are the people who issue the driver's license that federal law requires to show whether or not you are a citizen and require proof of citizenship in order to get it. But that information isn't moving from DDS to Secretary of State's office, and that's how we have all kinds of problems with people having the information that's on file and accurate with the DDS, but it's on file and inaccurate in the Secretary of State's office. It's because it's going to be uploaded manually. We need to fix that. As far as the actual conduct of our elections, I'm the only candidate in this race who's called for the decertification of these machines in this year's elections because they no longer meet the statutory criteria of reliability. I would use the process under current law to decertify these machines so that we could have elections that everybody could understand how the voter voted, because we could all see it for ourselves with our own eyes.
Time. Thank you. Johnny Kaufman, your turn to ask a question.
Yes. If you win and run for re-election as Secretary of State or for another office, will you step aside from your role as Secretary of State or continue to stay in that role, overseeing the elections?
In the past, whether we've had Democratic Secretaries of State or Republican Secretaries of State, without exception, they have either resigned from the office in order to run for something else, or they've taken a very public commitment to recuse themselves from any matter that comes before them in official capacity that could affect their political prospects one way or the other. I would certainly do that. I think it's a mistake not to do that. When I was a little boy, my daddy taught me that no man can be a judge of his own case. And I think it follows with even greater force that no politician can be the judge of his own election. I think you should either resign or recuse yourself, at the very least, if you're going to continue in the office that you were elected to do.
Thank you. Crystal Edmondson.
I want to shift gears, if I may, and talk a little bit about business registrations. Georgia has been named a best state in which to do business for a number of years. Businesses have to register each year, and some companies have said they'd like to see the process streamlined. Do you agree that changes need to be made, and how would you improve the business registration system for small businesses here in Georgia?
There is no question that there's room for improvement. We used to be at the head of the class, and now we're at the back of the class, and this seems almost endemic to public computer platforms of almost any size and magnitude. We need to streamline the process, but here's the more important thing. We need people on the other end of the phone, so that when the computer hadn't got it right and you got to deal with a problem solver, you got some human being you can deal with. We're not doing that now. We've starved this office of the resources that it needs in order to provide service. Granted, 95% of the time, 95% of your problems are solved with one click of the button. But when it's not, you need a human being at the other side of the line, someone who can help you solve these problems. I'm committed to bringing customer service back to this office. And here's another point. The small business community, which is just as dependent on the Secretary of State's office as the big business community, depends on it even more to be working efficiently and in a responsive fashion, because they can't absorb the costs of dealing with an unresponsive bureaucracy the way big business can. It's the best way to help job creators in the state is make sure this office is working as efficiently as possible.
Time. Thank you very much. Johnny Kaufman, next question.
Yes, back to voting. Would you propose changing the state's exact match policy, and how would you be able to do that administratively if you would like to change it?
First off, there's lots of discretion to do this administratively. There is rulemaking authority on the part of the State Board of Elections, and that authority ought to be invoked in order to provide an answer to the 159 different jurisdictions that are going it their own way because they're not getting any guidance from the state anymore. This is a serious problem that no one's talking about. Georgia did not have to worry about this problem too much before the Voting Rights Act was repealed by the Supreme Court. Since they struck it down, we had all kinds of guidance from Washington. We don't have that anymore, and the Secretary of State's office has not stepped up to the plate to exercise the authority under Georgia law to provide some guidance. The guidance ought to be that if it's clear that this person who's on the ID is the person who's on the rolls, and you ought to let them vote, no matter what little minor discrepancies are. If it's clear to a person with common sense that this is the person who's identified on the ID and who's described in the records, then you ought to allow someone to vote. There should be no room for, there's no discretion to do otherwise. That's how we count ballots that are cast. It's also how we should answer the common sense question, is this the person who has the right to cast that ballot?
Okay, time. Thank you very much. Crystal Edmondson, next question.
I'd like to follow up on a response that you gave about business registrations and adding to customer service aspects of that office. How would you fund that, and do you see that as something that could be expanded? Are the finances there? How would you do that?
They're not there, and that's the main culprit, and that's something that needs to be addressed. Look, the Secretary of State's office is being used by the legislature as a cash cow. They're milking it for excess revenues more than they're giving back to that office. That office is a constituent services agency that charges user fees for the services that folks are compelled to get through that office. And yet when the user fee includes costs that are not just the cost of the service, but a hidden surtax, revenue that's going into the general fund that the legislature is using to spend on other things, they're not being charged a fee for a service. They're being taxed as well as being charged for a service. The one thing you know is that they're not getting back what they're paying for. And I would advocate for a complete balance in the revenues of that office so the income coming out and the services going back are the same. You'll never get what you're paying for as long as somebody else is raking $25, $30, $40 million off the top for fees you're paying for services you're not getting.
Thank you, Johnny Kaufman.
This is going back to something we started with, and it is a matter of question at the moment, and I'm wondering what your opinion is on it. Was the result of the governor's race in these midterms in Georgia legitimate?
Here's the problem. No one can say how the election was affected by these small things that have come to light. An exact match problem that keeps 53,000 people in doubt as to whether or not they can vote when it's the job of the Secretary of State to tell them yes or no. A purge program that causes some folks to believe they're still enrolled when they're not, and doesn't and actually persuade some people that they've been disenrolled when they haven't been, that they've been purged when they haven't been. We can never answer that question. Just as it's the same with these machines. A lot of the problems we have with our machines is not that you can't say that they've been hacked. You can't say they have not been hacked. It's an impossible a question to be able to answer in the first place. That's why whenever there is a close election, we have to have enough confidence in the rules and the answers we're getting to these questions so that we'll be able to call an election that's close just as early and with just as much confidence as we can call an election that's a 5-point blowout. We can't do that now. We could afford to not do that when there are just blowout elections in our political future. Not anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. That is all the time we have for questions. John Barrow, you now have 60 seconds for a closing statement.
Look, if we want integrity in our elections, we've got to have integrity in our elected officials, and you don't get that by hiring folks who are lying their way into office. Maybe lying about their taxes. Oh, the dog ate all those tax liens. Or lying about their excuse for not showing up at a debate to defend the positions they've taken. You don't get that by hiring folks who are not telling the truth about their opponent's positions on the records. Integrity also means getting it right. And if it's important to get it right, then it's important that this be done in a bipartisan fashion. And I think our elections are important enough to get right. Now, working in a bipartisan fashion means working across party lines without regard to which party is going to benefit. And it also means something it's a promise, really, that I have kept all of my public life. I've kept that promise under the most trying circumstances in American politics. It's a promise my opponent hadn't even made, much less able to keep. And he certainly didn't bother to come here to make that promise today. If you want a Secretary of State who'll do what's right and do what it takes to get things done right, then I ask for your vote, and I'd be proud to have your support.
Thank you very much. That concludes our debate. We would like to remind voters Election Day is Tuesday, December 4th. Early voting is already underway. Please visit your county elections office to determine the early voting locations and times in your area. And our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of journalists. I would also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club and Georgia Public Broadcasting for arranging today's debate. For more information on the full schedule of general election runoff debates, please visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be archived there and on Georgia Public Broadcasting's website, which is gpb.org. I'm Ricky Babington. Thank you for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series.